Greetings, guys. Welcome to another week of Evolve. I am your host, Monette Brann-Natta, and I am so happy to have you here today to share some energy with me. Today, it's just me. We're going to just talk today, just you and I. I've been thinking a lot over the past couple weeks. I'm often thinking a lot, and I've been watching some very interesting things happen around us in the media. One of the things that's really caught my attention and has been fraught with many lessons is the meteoric rise of a conservative talk show host named Tomi Lahren. She is a millennial, and I'm sure you've heard of her name. She worked, I should say, in the past tense, for Glenn Beck on The Blaze, his offshoot after he left his conservative news channel at Fox. She was really a flashpoint, a lightning rod for this conservative movement. She was incredibly talented. I do not agree with her politics, but I am a person who respects the hustle, and I can recognize true gifts and talents when I see them. And the reason that she got to where she was being the operative word, is because she was truly a talent. Now, she's not there anymore, and that's not what our whole lesson is about today. But we're going to pick out a little acorn out of that lesson, and we're going to talk about the acorn in Tomi and the acorn inside of ourselves that eventually can grow into the oak tree. And whether you agree with her politics or you don't agree with them, you have to admit, for a moment in time, she was part of the zeitgeist. She was part of the conversation. She was part of our national conversation for a moment in time. And at 20-something, I think 24 years old, you don't get there unless there's greatness inside of you. Now, again, many friends would hear me say this and say, "What are you saying? Not this girl." I agree. Maybe not this girl, but this girl had talent. And many of us do have talent. And I want to recognize how we can foster and keep that. One of the things that I really recall being touched by was many of the interviews that she began to do as she was starting to offend or enlighten, depending on which side you were on, the people and her base and folks around her, the objectors and people that were in agreement with her. And I remember her being interviewed by some of my favorite radio show hosts and some of my favorite talk show hosts. And they would say, "But Tomi, don't you see how this is incongruent? But Tomi, don't you understand that there are nuances on this side just like there are nuances on your side?" And she would act like she didn't see it. What a lot of them were saying to her was, "I feel that maybe you're doing the talking points of the network that you now are employed with," which was The Blaze, and those are conservative talking points. And she would say, no, this is how I feel. This is it. And she was fantastic at it. I think she'd modeled herself after a juggernaut in the conservative talk point industry, who I don't need to even mention the name. They are known, and they've been in the news a lot lately too. But he did fantastic at what he did. He was fantastic. I think of other people like Rush Limbaugh and all these other people that have this kind of energy when they're dealing with their base and they're dealing with their message. And I think that Tomi saw them and said, "I want to be like them." And today we're going to talk about the dangers and wanting to be like people and not living in your authentic self. One of the questions that was posed to her was that, "Are these your real feelings?" And at each time, with passion, she would say, "Yes, this is how I really feel. I am not a talking point person. I am not parroting the messages that my station, The Blaze, has been giving to me. I am just saying the opinions. I don't like snowflakes." There are a lot of quotes that were very famous from Tomi. Except at one point here in the recent past, she was on The View. And many of you may have seen or heard about this if you were keeping up with it. And she was asked by the host about her views on pro-choice or pro-life. And she said that she was pro-choice because she didn't want the government in her body or her dealing with her guns because she really believes in the Second Amendment. And I thought wow, that is the truth of who Tommy is. But that truth quickly unraveled her career because even though she was saying to us, I am not parroting what is being said to me, we quickly found out that there was someone else pulling the strings. There was a Geppetto in the background, and there was somebody that was controlling really what she was saying because her truth came out in that moment while she was on The View. And it upset her base, a conservative base that doesn't relate or believe in what she said. And they thought, this is so different than the Tommy that we've grown to love and have begun to support on an internet-based talk show, news show. That's where she is. That's where The Blaze is. And she had millions of views. And this is something that takes a while to do. People invest a lot of time to build up their YouTube following, and she had done it instantaneously. Now, there were a few factors that helped. She's attractive, she's young, she's intelligent. So these were things that were making people be interested in what she was saying. And she was often controversial, and we are often taken and fascinated with things that are opposing or controversial to our views. So some people hate watched her, quote unquote. That's a thing. They didn't really like her, but they were watching and because they wanted to see what crazy things she would say next. But she has a talent. Again, not a popular opinion for me to have, considering what some of the things that she was espousing were. But again, I recognize that talent. Now, here's the problem that happened with Tommy. She told her truth, which was what she believed in. And she was quickly fired, pretty unceremoniously. Within a matter of hours, essentially, she was publicly fired on a social media network by Glenn Beck, and she was not allowed. She was first put on leave and then eventually fired. And I recall that conversation she had with one of my favorite radio hosts that said, you have to make sure that all this rhetoric you're speaking is what you really believe. Because if it's not, and if there's ever a chink that's discovered in your armor, it will be your demise. And she, again, assured, no, this is absolutely what I believe. But we found out very quickly that it wasn't what she believed. And we found out even more quickly that what that man had said to her, giving her some advice as a person that had been in the industry for many years, was 100% accurate. The thing that was her undoing was stepping into a position that she wasn't really called to do. Not that she's not a fantastic orator, or not that she is not supposed to be on radio or talk. Even if you don't agree with her, again, the girl has talent. But here's my thing. She wasn't being authentic to herself. And living within authenticity will always lead to your demise. You must believe whatever it is that you are called to do. You must not be shaken from your path. You must believe in your core what you are called to do, and not be parroting what you think somebody else wants from your life, whether it's a boss like her situation or our parents having ideas about what our future should look like in our everyday lives, because you will be tested about what it is that you want to do. Many times on Evolve, we talk about destiny and what that means and how to manifest it and where are we going. But I've never really talked about being authentic in knowing what your destiny is and not being shaken. Because to be who you really are and to be on your path, you cannot become distracted. You cannot take in the words that somebody else might want you to say and spit them out, because it will be tested. You will be tested. Your mettle will be tested. And you'll be asked, is this what your belief really is? You can't be distracted, because that distraction robs you from being the best that you can be. Because if you keep trying to put on the suit of another person, you never figure out what suit you're supposed to be wearing and who you really are. So I have to ask you, who are you dressing up like? Who are you dressing up like? You know, again, as a preschool teacher, we did a thing called dramatic play, and that helps the children figure out what their roles are in life. And we have play areas. And it was fascinating to see them act out the behaviors they saw at home. They were mirroring the behaviors that they saw at home. So if the parents had had an argument the night before, then little Jake and little Brianna had an argument in the dramatic play area the next day, as they were trying to process what they were seeing. If they were seeing loving interaction and we were talking about sharing at home, that was acted out. And they put on these clothes and they pretended to be their parents, but they were not their parents. They were these little embryos, these little pieces of DNA from their parents, and they weren't ready to really assume the responsibilities of the world, but they sure were trying. And in life, we are asked to try things on, to figure out what works for us, to see what it is that we like. But sometimes we're dressing up like people that we wish to emulate. We see their success and we think, I want to be like them. And again, that's okay. That's part of our learning process. Like when we're toddlers and we're figuring out who do we want to be like and how do we become like them, until we start to formulate an idea of what really works for us. So sometimes we can find ourselves dressing up like a big sister or a third cousin, and you're weighing your success because maybe she's married to a doctor and your husband's a garbage collector and you're on him day and night and saying, babe, you got to do something. You got to get better. You got to improve yourself. You need to grow up. You need to get better education. And you're asking for him to be something that he was never. And you knew that when you guys got together and you were okay with that. But because you're looking at that sister that maybe your mom always treated better and you always thought that she had a better clout in the family. And so you want your husband to mirror what her husband did, but that's not your lot. And that's not what you were chosen to do. And I want you to listen to where that voice is coming from. When you're saying things must improve, whether that's your situation or if it's something else, I want you to understand that that voice in your ear that's saying that you need, and it needs to be more, and you need to get to their level is not coming from destiny. It is coming from a desperate need to measure up to the peer pressure that the people that have influence over you have defined as your accomplishment. So your definition of accomplishment is defined by the people that have influenced you. And too many of us, men and women, are often influenced by that. And it's okay. Some of us have mentors. Some of us have people speaking into our lives. And we are called to use our spirit of discernment. And what that means is to know whether that person has a good intention for us or not, to decide what they're saying to us is truth or isn't truth. But often we're very influenced by the people around us, our parents, our loved ones, our friends, and we have an idea of what should be happening in our life because they've told us what should be happening in our life. And it may not be what should be happening for us. It may not be an authentic thing. It is not wise, folks, to be in the state of comparison. It's so important to settle into who you are called to be. I was listening to my favorite preacher, and he was talking about being called. And I think that it's so interesting that we often forego what our real calling is to try to fulfill and to try to make someone else happy when we're the one that has to really live with that. And sometimes this has happened too. Our ego will demand that we take a higher position or that we push ourselves into a new thing, even though we're not yet qualified for it, because our ego is tricky and it demands to be fed on a constant basis. So I know that may seem a little confusing. You have a calling. You know that you have that. What do you mean? Isn't it good, Monette, for us to push forward and to want to ascend to the next level? Yes, it is. But everything happens in its time. There is a season for everything. And you have to grow and be in the process before you can ascend to that next step.